Hey everybody, there is a new show premiering on the New Thought Media Network in January. Poetry, Prayer and Practice will feature authors, coaches and leaders encouraging you to explore spiritual practice in a variety of forms. It will be hosted by Tracy Brown, on Tuesdays at noon, Mountain Time. Sometimes she'll be interviewing people. Other times she will take you into spiritual practice herself. So mark your calendar and join her. Tuesdays, noon Mountain. In the meantime, here's a preview of the type of content you can expect.
So I'm talking to Laura Scheele, and this is such a fascinating conversation, right? Because we spent time together in what I like to call a poetry mastermind, but what people have already heard about as Poetry Chapel. And I don't know, it's just been delightful getting to know you a little bit.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. Between your poetry and the way that you read poetry. I've said to many people, I would just like to have Tracy Brown read me poetry every day. It would be a beautiful meditation.
Thank you for that. And it is one of the things that go under the list of, when you have parents writing your kids, and there are things that you never want to ever do the way they did.
Mm-hmm.
But my love for poetry and reading or reciting poetry really did come from my mother, because she read poetry and out loud.
Oh, that's really beautiful.
And when we had to do presentations, sometimes when I was very small, she would take me to places, and in our church, there was a lot of reading of poetry, especially Black poets.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that seed was planted very, very young. And even today, when I'm reading for myself, I read out loud a lot for poetry.
Beautiful thing.
I know about you, but they don't.
Sure.
So maybe the 1 to 2 minute version of highlights of who is Laura Scheele.
All right. Well, I am a suburban mom living in Indiana. I was a very sensitive, very kind of weird kid. I used to walk around and I would flap my arms and come up with all these stories in my head as a kid. And then as I got older, I thought that was something I needed to hide because it was weird. And it wasn't until a few years ago, I was over 30, when I realized that's my superpower, is that I can make up beautiful things in my mind and to connect to people's emotions that way through my own, sensitivity. And that's how I found writing, as a therapy and as an art.
I love that. And I can imagine that as you describe it, like, oh, people think I'm weird, I won't do that anymore. And then maybe having children yourself and having to be creative. I don't know. I'm making that up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That started. It really did, actually. Yeah. When I became a stay-at-home mom, I was a kindergarten teacher first. But when I decided to stay home, I was kind of looking for that thing that still kept me and my identity. And I thought maybe I could write a children's book. And so I started to tap into that creative side and realized that I had been missing that, needing that in my life.
I love that. Well, it sure has grown into some beautiful poetry. And, often holding up the book, Bouquet of Stars, yes, that we got to work together to create and hear each other's poetry. And I would just love it if you would share one of the poems you wrote that is included in Bouquet of Stars.
I would love to. And the one I'm going to read is actually one that, as I've thought more about it, I think it could be a children's book if there were images added to it. But it's called Superhuman. And it's also about that transition from my other life to deciding I was a writer, having to convince myself I was a writer, and then also kind of tell the world it's okay. It's okay to be different from the person that you originally thought you were going to be. So that's what this is. Superhuman. It's magnificent that, as humans, we have the unique capacity to completely reinvent ourselves in the middle of our lives. Imagine, for a moment, a hippopotamus in his big mouth glory exclaiming, "Water is no longer my thing. I think I'll grow wings and learn to fly, to live a weightless life." Well, no, I don't believe that could be. But by George, a trash man can earn his pilot's license, and boom, the trucks are history. It's magnificent that there are no rules in stone to claim you must stay exactly who you are right now. Even characters of the Bible changed their name. Julia Childs learned to cook at 40. Harry Potter was born from a midlife crisis. All this to say, your heart might always beat the same. Birthmarks and genetics may hold their place, but you can live a life that's truer. The timid can be the teacher, the judge, a humble servant. You can do this because you're human.
So I take that deep breath and just let it in. And you're so right. And I think this is one of the reasons I love this poem too, because don't we need reminders that you're not stuck? You don't have to be stuck, especially if you're doing something that is not reflecting your true self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this can apply to so many other things than just what you're doing as your career. You know, it can apply to many ways that you could be living your life, living in shame, living in people pleasing, living in a lie. That there are so many ways we do that.
Yeah, so very cool. So very cool. So what kind of feedback have you gotten about that particular poem or your poetry in general?
From my immediate world, surprise. I think many people knew that I loved to write, but didn't see me as writing at a professional level. And then since the book has come out, there's been a lot of surprise that, so you are a writer. So you do this. And yeah, I've had some really beautiful comments about how I've touched people and they feel more seen, and they feel like I'm, especially with this poem, I'm giving permission to something. And that's been a beautiful thing. I mean, that's all you can hope to do, is hope that you can reach one person and give them permission to be more themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. And so you are modeling permission to be yourself and permission for all of us to be ourselves. And people can find that poem and others in Bouquet of Stars, and by going to bouquetofstars.com, or simply going to Amazon or your favorite book seller. It is probably there as well. And Laura, thanks so much for sharing that poem. It's delightful to talk to you.
It's an absolute honor to be here. Thank you for asking me, Tracy.
Visit bouquetofstars.com to purchase the book. And don't forget to mark your calendar for Poetry, Prayer and Practice, hosted by Tracy Brown. Tuesdays at noon Mountain Time. Beginning January 3rd.